Picture this. You're sitting in a cramped office in Dhaka, Bangladesh. It's early morning, February 5th, 2016. The air conditioning hums quietly as you sip your tea and prepare for what should be another routine day at Bangladesh Bank, the country's central bank. You have no idea that across the world, a group of hackers has been living inside your computer systems for months, watching, learning, waiting for the perfect moment to execute what would become the most audacious bank heist in history. What happens next is a story so incredible, so filled with twists and turns, that if it were fiction, you'd probably call it unrealistic. It's a tale of cyber warfare, international money laundering, casino chips worth millions, and ultimately, how a single typo saved nearly $1 billion from disappearing into the digital void forever. This is the story of the Bangladesh bank heist. And it all started with someone making a very, very big mistake. But before we dive into the chaos of that February morning, we need to understand the stage that was set for this incredible crime. Bangladesh Bank isn't just any financial institution. It's the nerve center of an entire nation's economy, holding reserves that keep the country's financial system stable. In 2016, those reserves totaled around $30 billion, not exactly pocket change. The bank operates through a system called SWIFT, which stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Think of SWIFT as the postal service for international banking. When one bank needs to send money to another bank anywhere in the world, they use SWIFT to communicate those instructions. It's supposed to be secure, reliable, and trusted by financial institutions across the globe. The hackers knew this. They also knew that Bangladesh Bank, like many institutions in developing countries, didn't have the most sophisticated cybersecurity infrastructure. While major banks in New York or London might employ hundreds of security specialists and cutting-edge defense systems, Bangladesh Bank was operating with a much smaller team and older technology. This wasn't some random group of script kiddies looking to make a quick buck. The attackers behind this operation were professionals, likely state-sponsored, with access to sophisticated malware and an intimate understanding of international banking systems. Intelligence agencies later traced the attack to a group called Lazarus, the same hackers responsible for the devastating Sony Pictures attack in 2014. The infiltration began months before that fateful February morning. Using carefully crafted phishing emails, the hackers managed to gain access to Bangladesh Bank's internal network. Once inside, they moved quietly, methodically, like digital ghosts studying their target. They learned the bank's procedures, identified key personnel, and most importantly, figured out how the SWIFT system worked. SWIFT transactions require specific formatting and authentication codes. Each bank has unique credentials that verify their identity when sending transfer requests. The hackers spent weeks, possibly months, learning these protocols. They studied the bank's transaction patterns, noting when transfers typically occurred and what amounts would be considered normal. But here's where it gets really clever. The hackers didn't just want to steal money. They wanted to steal money and cover their tracks. They installed malware on the bank's computers that would hide their fraudulent transactions from appearing on local records. When bank employees checked their systems the next morning, everything would look perfectly normal. The plan was breathtaking in its scope and ambition. They would initiate dozens of fraudulent SWIFT transfers, moving nearly $1 billion from Bangladesh Bank's account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to accounts across the world. The money would then be quickly laundered through a complex network of shell companies, casinos, and money changers before disappearing forever. February 4th, 2016, a Thursday evening in Dhaka. The banking day is winding down and most employees are heading home for the weekend. In Bangladesh, the weekend falls on Friday and Saturday, meaning the bank would be closed for the next 2 days. This timing wasn't coincidental. The hackers had planned this carefully, knowing they would have roughly 60 hours before anyone might notice something was wrong. As the last employees locked up and headed home, the hackers began their assault. Working from halfway around the world, they accessed Bangladesh Bank's SWIFT terminal and began crafting their fraudulent transfer requests. The messages were formatted perfectly, using the bank's legitimate credentials and following proper SWIFT protocols. The first transfer request was for $20 million, destined for an account at Pan Asia Banking Corporation in the Philippines. Then another for $20 million, then $30 million. One by one, the hackers fired off 35 different transfer requests, each one representing millions of dollars that would soon vanish from Bangladesh's national reserves. But the crown jewel of their operation was a single massive transfer request for $850 million. This astronomical sum was destined for a supposed non-profit organization called the Shalika Foundation, which claimed to be involved in charitable work in Sri Lanka. In reality, the Shalika Foundation was nothing more than a shell company created specifically for this heist. The hackers had done their homework on this fake charity. They'd created convincing documentation, established banking relationships, and built what appeared to be a legitimate organizational structure. To anyone conducting a cursory review, the Shalika Foundation would have looked like exactly the kind of organization that might receive large international donations. As the transfer requests flew through cyberspace toward the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, the hackers must have felt confident. Their malware was working perfectly, hiding all evidence of the transactions from Bangladesh Bank's internal systems. The timing was ideal, with a long weekend providing cover for their escape. Everything was going according to plan. But they had made one critical error. In their haste to execute the largest financial theft in history, someone had made a typo. Instead of spelling foundation correctly in the Shalika Foundation transfer request, they had written fandation. Just one missing letter. One small mistake in a sea of perfect planning and execution. Meanwhile, at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, something unusual was happening. SWIFT transfer requests from Bangladesh typically numbered in the dozens per day, not the sudden flood of 35 massive transfers that had just arrived. The sheer volume was unusual enough to raise eyebrows, but it was that spelling mistake that really caught someone's attention. You have to understand, banks deal with enormous sums of money every single day. A $20 million transfer, while significant, isn't necessarily cause for alarm at an institution like the Fed. But when you're processing a transfer for nearly $1 billion to an organization called the Shalika Foundation, red flags start going up. The Federal Reserve operates with extreme caution when it comes to large international transfers. They have entire departments dedicated to compliance and fraud prevention. When something doesn't look right, they investigate. And a charitable organization with a misspelled name receiving the equivalent of a small country's GDP definitely didn't look right. Banking professionals are trained to spot irregularities. And this was about as irregular as it gets. The compliance team at the Fed began asking questions. Who was the Shalika Foundation? Why was Bangladesh Bank sending them such an enormous sum? And most importantly, why couldn't anyone spell foundation correctly? Back in Dhaka, it was now Friday morning. Bangladesh Bank remained closed for the weekend, and the hackers' malware continued to hide evidence of the fraudulent transfers from the bank's systems. For all anyone in Bangladesh knew, everything was perfectly normal. But at the Federal Reserve in New York, investigators were digging deeper into the suspicious transfers. They began reaching out to Bangladesh Bank, trying to verify the legitimacy of these massive transactions. However, with the bank closed for the weekend and limited communication channels available, getting answers proved challenging. The hackers had counted on this communication gap. They knew that by the time anyone could properly investigate their transfers, the money would already be long gone, laundered through their network of accomplices and shell companies. What they hadn't counted on was that single spelling mistake, creating enough suspicion to trigger an immediate investigation. As Friday turned into Saturday, Investigators at the Federal Reserve were working overtime. The spelling mistake had opened a door that the hackers never intended to crack. Banking compliance officers began cross-referencing the Shalika Foundation against international databases of legitimate charities. What they found was troubling, or rather, what they didn't find. The foundation existed on paper, sure, but its digital footprint was suspiciously thin. For an organization supposedly large enough to receive an $850 million donation, the Shalika Foundation had remarkably little online presence. No substantial charitable work could be verified. No major donors were listed. No impact reports existed. Meanwhile, some of the smaller transfer requests had already been processed. 4 transactions totaling $81 million had successfully reached their destinations in the Philippines before anyone could stop them. The money was immediately withdrawn and began its journey through a labyrinthine money laundering operation that would make your head spin. Picture this scene unfolding in Manila. Men in expensive suits walking into casinos with duffel bags full of cash. The Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation had received the fraudulent transfers and, following instructions from the supposed account holders, converted millions into casino chips at the Soler Resort and Casino. In the world of money laundering, casinos are perfect vehicles for cleaning dirty money. You walk in with cash, gamble for a few hours, then cash out with chips that can be converted back to apparently legitimate funds. The operation was so smooth, so professional, that casino staff didn't bat an eye at customers exchanging tens of millions of dollars for chips. This wasn't their first rodeo. The Philippines had become a haven for this type of financial laundering, with regulations that made it relatively easy to move large sums of money without triggering immediate investigations. But back in New York, that spelling mistake continued to haunt the hackers' perfect plan. By Saturday afternoon, Federal Reserve investigators had compiled enough red flags to justify freezing the remaining transfers. The $850 million payment to the misspelled foundation was halted just hours before it would have been processed. Sunday night in Dhaka. Bangladesh Bank employees were preparing for the start of a new work week, completely unaware that their institution had just been targeted in the largest attempted bank heist in history. The hackers' malware had done its job perfectly, hiding all evidence of the fraudulent SWIFT transactions from the bank's internal monitoring systems. Monday morning arrived like any other. Employees filed into the building, turned on their computers, and began their daily routines. It wasn't until mid-morning that someone noticed something unusual. The bank's SWIFT printer, which normally produced a steady stream of transaction confirmations, had been malfunctioning all weekend. No confirmations had been printed since Thursday evening. This might seem like a minor technical glitch, but in the world of international banking, documentation is everything. Every transfer, every confirmation, every receipt gets printed and filed. When the IT department investigated the printer issue, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. The printer hadn't been broken. The hackers' malware had been preventing it from working, ensuring that no physical evidence of their fraudulent transfers would exist. When technicians finally got the printer working again, it immediately began spitting out confirmation after confirmation of transfers that nobody at Bangladesh Bank had authorized. 35 transfer requests, nearly $1 billion. All sent out over the weekend while the bank was closed and their systems were compromised. The chaos that followed was immediate and intense. Senior bank officials were called in for emergency meetings. Government ministers were briefed on the situation. International law enforcement agencies were contacted. The realization that they had been victims of the largest cyber heist in history sent shockwaves through Bangladesh's financial system. But there was a silver lining to this disaster. That single spelling mistake had saved them from losing nearly everything. While $81 million was certainly a devastating loss, it was nothing compared to the billion-dollar catastrophe that had been narrowly averted. The investigation that followed revealed the incredible sophistication of the attack. The Lazarus Group had spent months studying Bangladesh Bank's systems, learning their procedures, and crafting the perfect heist. They had bypassed multiple security measures, installed custom malware, and created an elaborate international money laundering network. Yet for all their technical prowess and meticulous planning, they had been undone by something as simple as a typo. One missing letter in fandation had created enough suspicion to unravel their entire operation. The aftermath of the Bangladesh Bank heist sent shockwaves through the international banking community. SWIFT implemented new security protocols. Banks around the world upgraded their cybersecurity systems. The incident became a wake-up call about the vulnerabilities that existed in the global financial system. Today, the case remains a fascinating study in both criminal ingenuity and human fallibility. The hackers demonstrated that with enough time, resources, and expertise, even the most secure systems can be compromised. But they also proved that sometimes the smallest mistakes can have the biggest consequences. As for the $81 million that was successfully stolen, most of it disappeared into the shadowy world of international money laundering. Some funds were eventually recovered through legal proceedings, but the majority vanished forever, likely funding other criminal enterprises or finding its way into the pockets of the hackers themselves. The Bangladesh Bank heist stands as a reminder that in our increasingly digital world, the line between the physical and virtual realms continues to blur. A group of hackers sitting in front of computers thousands of miles away came within a single typo of stealing $1 billion from a sovereign nation's treasury. And sometimes, in the high-stakes world of international cybercrime, it's the smallest details that make all the difference between success and spectacular failure.